I'm really excited to welcome Sid, who flew in from Stockholm. He works for a company called Northvolt, which is probably one of the most exciting, biggest challengers in battery design, manufacturing. He has an experience, a couple of years, probably 7 or so at Apple, working on health technology. And so really excited to learn about the future of machine learning in energy and climate-related topics. So Sid, over to you.
Morning, everyone. Super excited to be here. First time here, so this is this is a really high bar. If we ever organize a RAAIS in Stockholm, we gotta beat this. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Switching gears from autonomous cars to batteries. So what would power the autonomous cars, and how machine learning plays a role here. So a little bit about myself. I do not come from the battery world. I used to work on autonomous cars for a few years at Apple, and mostly pointed cameras at the human body throughout my career, and now decided to point cameras at batteries and sensors at batteries to understand how we can uncover the mysteries inside this little living organism, pseudo-living organism. So jumping right in, I don't know how many of you have actually heard of Northvolt. Okay, quite a few, I'd say 40% of the crowd here. So Northvolt was founded in 2016 by two former Tesla executives, Peter Carlson and Paolo Cerruti, in Stockholm. So it's headquartered in Stockholm, and the mission is to build the world's greenest battery. And this is actually not a very easy problem. So it's a full stack problem where you have to think about how we enable this, right from materials and sustainable supply chain to actually building electrode, to building the cells and then recycling. So Northvolt has decided to take the full stack of this problem space and start building competencies in all areas. The whole idea of vertical integration done at scale turns out it's extremely challenging and also CapEx heavy. So the company has raised about little over $8 billion in equity and debt. The order book is pretty big, mostly automotive OEMs, about $55 billion. And I wouldn't call this company a startup anymore. We are in very much a scale-up phase. So 4,500 employees, out of which close to 2,500 work at the factory in northern Sweden, in a city called Skellefteå. I work at Northvolt Labs, which is the product development and R&D division of Northvolt. And we can safely say this is turning into a world-leading battery campus where some of the best people who are innovating in this space work at Northvolt. This is a rendering of the campus, what it would become in a few years. We have about 50% of the campus complete. That big building at the back is a 250 megawatt hour battery manufacturing line where we build our pilot samples, A sample and B sample. So in batteries, you have a few different stages of prototyping, and then you get to a C sample that you send to the customer. They test it out in their packs, and then you get to start a production. So this facility is used to build up to B sample, and then we go to C sample in Skellefteå. This is an overview of the journey. Started in 2016, but things really started picking up in 2020, 2021. We acquired Cuberg, which is a high-performance battery company out in San Leandro, California, doing some of our high-performance battery business. So we have a pretty talented team there. A few joint ventures along the way. Announced a joint venture with Volvo, building the 5th Gigafactory out in Gothenburg, which is the western coast of Sweden. And then eventually, I started at Northvolt in September 2022, where we established this new team for machine learning R&D. So batteries are a complex pseudo-living thing. So this was the first realization I had when I was trying to determine what am I going to do at a battery company coming from Apple. And I started reading, I started learning, and it turned out batteries are probably the second most complex system when it comes to all these different heterogeneous processes. So we started looking at that. And this is a slide from Will Shu at Stanford, so it's inspired by one of his slides. And if we think about what goes on inside a battery, and you want to understand all these different phenomena, you can draw this graph, which is time versus space, so size and time. And if we lay out the axes from picoseconds to years and then nanometers to meters, it becomes simpler to lay down and put different aspects of battery development on this chart. So there's materials, which is usually extremely small size, so nanometers to a few microns. There is cells, which is a few millimeters, depending on what size of cell it is, to a few centimeters. And then there is systems where you pack the cells together and you build a module or a pack that either powers the grid or goes in a car. And when we look at this map, you can start putting different problems or different problem areas that are being researched in this field. And you can think of 3 different areas that you can divide the overall space. So there's number 1 is synthesis and manufacturing. So and you can start putting them across this 2D plot. Then there is imaging and sensor-based measurements. So to understand the materials at different space, different scales, you have different types of imaging techniques. And then lastly is the fun part, which is these modeling methods. So most of the battery research utilizes a lot of physics-based models and a lot of simulations, physics-based simulations, which are extremely costly and largely approximated in some areas. So these are very complex physics-based models where more than half of the parameters are highly approximated. And data plays a huge role in that case. So when we start to collect and build these batteries at scale, you can start to learn a lot more about these parameters and start enhancing, enriching these physics-based models. So that becomes extremely exciting, and that's where machine learning can come in. So you can think of drawing little ellipses around these 3 areas and start thinking about projects on how you uncover certain mysteries. So what are these different mysteries? And this is a picture out of a paper that came out of Oxford, David Howey's lab. I don't know how many of you have heard of his lab, but it's a really, really cool group of people working on understanding degradation mechanisms. So this is a very famous schematic. What you see here is what is inside of a battery, cartonized with all the processes that are going on when you pass current through a battery. So all of this happens over that time and scale, over the time and scale graph. On the left, you have the copper current collector, the binder. So this is the anode side. That's the cathode side. You have little dendrites growing that can sometimes tear through the separator and cause a short circuit. That's when the batteries blow up. You may have seen in the news in some cases. There are hundreds of other problems that can go wrong. So imagine stacking these little sheets of electrode, filling them up with electrolyte, pre-charging them, and then shipping them out. But all of this is happening. And largely, this is understood, but it's very, very hard to control when you actually do this at scale. And that makes it even more important for us to understand what are the key mechanisms that trigger these phenomena. And that's where machine learning comes in, and that's one of the problems we're trying to go after. So let me lay down the grand challenges for machine learning. And this was kind of the first slide that I started building out when I started at Northvolt. And the 2 major challenges are, I come from health, so I think about this as anatomy and function. So controlling chemistry is like understanding anatomy. And controlling function is modeling that battery heterogeneity across time and scale. So both of these problems, thinking about how they manifest themselves across time and scale, and thinking about sensing, machine learning, how we capture this data, how we study the batteries without opening them up after they have gone into a can and you're charging them, and we want to study what's going on with the material. It's a very challenging problem. And then another area of ML that can have a huge impact is, can we be profitable? Can we manufacture these batteries at a very high efficiency, very high quality, and reduce scrap, reduce costs? So there comes in the sustainability angle. And then lastly, this is a little bit of a dream of mine. Not many battery manufacturing companies, most of them are in China, have large machine learning teams or AI teams that are working on materials, manufacturing, computer vision, and so on. So we really wish to create this hub here in Europe where the best people in AI come and solve this problem. come and help us discover new materials for future batteries, come and help us solve some of these most challenging physics modeling problems. So this is, a whole new space that, for many of you and your colleagues, that can be explored now. And we are thinking about this extremely seriously, not as a commodity company, because batteries have been considered as a commodity, but we are thinking about it as a technology company. So my team, this is the purpose statement, and hopefully some of you can relate to it. It's a multidisciplinary team with astrophysicists, mechanical engineers, folks who worked in batteries for many years, material scientists, computer vision engineers, and even iOS developers. And we are focusing on two aspects. So what is the product development and manufacturing? So both are very much in-house, using different types of sensors, different types of machine learning models, a lot of applied work, but also a bunch of research that has started. And then optimizing this for speed, quality, and sustainability. Now I'll jump into a few things that hopefully give you a glimpse of what are the different kinds of problems, show you the results. We're not going to dive too much into the methods, but the problem space is 4 different areas. The first one that we focus on, because we are a manufacturing company, one of the big nails to hammer with this big hammer of AI and machine learning is how can we improve our predictability and how can we understand the quality of the product that we are building. So the factory up in the north is touted to be about 60 gigawatt hours. We are on path to get it up and running for the first block, which is about 20 gigawatt hours. And that brings a whole lot of challenges in terms of quality. The next one is modeling heterogeneity. So the part that I talked about early on is this idea of state of health. So as you use a battery over the years, it has a certain cycle life or a certain capacity degradation profile. So we want to understand when we build a battery, how fast will its capacity degrade? And typically 80% SOH is when the battery is considered to go to second life. So we want to understand if the battery, what we are building, how fast will it go to 80%? How many times can it be charged and discharged? And if you have an electric car, this concept kind of makes sense because after, say, 400, 500,000 miles, the electric car's battery or the cells, all the cells are usually headed towards closer to 80% SOH. And this is important because customers care about this. The longer the battery lasts, the more money they can charge for the car. And the more money we can charge for selling these cells. The third one is the hard one, is thinking about new materials for going into anode, cathode, separators, electrolyte. Electrolyte is actually one of the biggest focuses in academic research as well, is what are the different salts and solvents that we can use. So I didn't draw this picture, but one easy way to think about it is you have materials. Materials have certain properties, and certain properties govern the performance of the combination of these materials. So if we can have tuning knobs on the materials and understand the property-material relationship, you can start to really optimize the performance based on what the battery will be used for. So this area is of extreme interest for us. And we are actually taking a lot of inspiration from the drug discovery space because that sister space of application of ML is slightly more advanced, but the problem space is very similar. So all of you working in drug discovery and biotech and pharma, I'd love to have a conversation during the break and ask a few questions there. And then the last one is, no LLM left behind or no user left behind. So scientifically, this is a pretty wide space of developing batteries. It's complex. The company is extremely multidisciplinary. So we are also exploring how do we build internal knowledge agents. So this is something that I leave it there. Hopefully at next year's summit, I get to talk about it if Nathan decides to invite us again. But this is extremely exciting because we are not just thinking of language, it's multimodal models. So, the one challenge we have in battery industry is the workforce is not scaling at the same speed the demand for batteries is scaling. So we need to skill up a lot of people very quickly. And to do that, you can't rely on 4-year degrees. You have to find more efficient ways to help people look up complex scientific information in simple forms. So this is a very important piece of work internally that we are thinking very carefully about. Jumping into deep learning, specifically for volumetric imaging, microscopy, surface cameras. So this is something all of you can relate to who have worked in computer vision. The two problems with deep learning in batteries with computer vision and imaging sensors is, one is giga-scale manufacturing needs extremely high speed and extremely high accuracy. And the data is quite scarce for this space specifically. So you run into the problem of low amount of training data. So you need a lot of clever ways to engineer pre-trained models and bring them over into the world of battery manufacturing. So we are working on that. The other problem is it's a commodity industry, so you have all these industrial suppliers that haven't necessarily moved at the same speed as consumer tech has. So you have really great machine learning models deployed on your phones, but the industrial vision companies haven't really accelerated at that pace. So they're still struggling with gathering large data sets. So large data sets from giga-scale factories are not actually available. So this is a push-pull sort of relationship where I don't want to give the data set to an industrial vision supplier, even though I have it, because I want to shut the door behind me. I don't want my competitors to actually learn what it means to build electrode at giga-scale. So there is a competitive thing, but at the same time, I do have to give the data set. So we have to find clever ways on how we obscure some of the key IP problems and keep it in-house, and how do we actually scale our vision suppliers, and how do we help them get to the same place. And then lastly, it's having the power of doing vertical integration and controlling that stack close to us. And this is an inspiration, typically from the previous place I worked at was Apple, and this is extremely powerful. Knowing what the sensing system is, building the core of the sensing system, as well as the machine learning stack, gives you a lot of control. You're not really having this fragmented problem of a supplier for a camera, then a supplier for the camera driver and the frame grabber. Then you have another machine learning model sitting on top that you're horse trading on milliseconds of accuracy with your factory floor quality team and so on. So I think this gives us full control. And this is extremely important for the fastest parts of the factory, which is typically the electrode. Electrode today is produced between 40 to 100 meters per minute, depending on how many cells you're producing. So it's an extremely fast process. So imagine a camera looking at this running tape, which is a few 100 centimeters, trying to detect defects that are between 50 to 500 microns, running at 50 to 100 meters per minute. So it's a hard problem, I'd say. So these are the 4 areas that I'll try to cover today. I think we'll talk about 2 of them, examples from 2 of these areas. What you see in the active material analysis is a cathode active material. These little particles, few nanometers, they crack. And when these particles crack, when you put them together in the electrode and you dry them, the electrode cracks. If the electrode cracks, the foil exposes. If the foil exposes, there's a short circuit, and boom. And this is where it starts. So being able to estimate this, predict this, understand this is a very, very important problem to solve. The other areas are more around quality. Volumetric defect detection is very interesting. The medical image inspiration. Once you take the jelly roll and you put it inside an aluminum can, you can't see inside. You've filled electrolyte, you've pre-charged it. What sometimes happens is when you're taking the jelly roll and you're putting it in the can, electrode shifts. And when it shifts, that's a problem because they are very precisely aligned. And if there's a shift between cathode and anode, the cathode can actually touch the anode. And that's another problem for things blowing up. Before we go into that, I want to show you the scale of the different vision systems and very quickly talk about why it's important for us to build in-house vision systems. And the main problem that we want to solve is the standardization. We want to build a few gigafactories. In fact, 5 are already in play. 5 have been announced. So we want to standardize how we build electrode at these 5 factories, how we evaluate quality of the electrode. So it becomes even more important to have this control internally. And then lastly is building IP, the in-house mechanical design, trying to really squeeze efficiencies into this design as we learn further and further. As the electrode manufacturing becomes more and more mature, we have to shift how we do vision inspection. So this is this space, as you can see, about 134 in-house vision systems, tons of data. I thought doing self-driving, so I was responsible for the data pipeline at Apple for the autonomous systems team, and I thought 3 petabytes a week was a massive data problem, 54 different sensors. But I think this is a massive data problem. This is about 5% of the factory. This is 5% of the cameras in the factory. So it's extremely large scale, running 24/7. Okay, shout out to V7. So how we've been going about this is taking a chapter from the book of autonomous driving and saying, okay, we got to label all these different defects that are on electrode. So we went and asked, okay, who is the most interesting young supplier for annotations? So coming from this space, I had an intuition, my team had an intuition how we should go about this. So we got in touch with V7. We were building our own in-house model, and what you see here is a video of the V7 annotators labeling the electrode surface for different defects. So this is an exaggerated defect that we created ourselves, huge crack. You have all these other defects. The comments are essentially the back and forth that happens between our quality team and their annotators when we don't agree on the attributes and so on. So this gives you a picture of how many parallels there are between the typical computer vision industry problems and this particular problem of electrode inspection. This is a human-machine interface that we have built internally where you can visualize spatially, so y-axis and x-axis, where these different defects are occurring on electrode. You can go and look at different types of defects, and you can click on one. It starts to show up at the bottom, and this gives our quality team a lot of power in trying to decide whether they want to stop the line, if there's a repeating defect, if there's a safety critical defect, and so on. And there are a few alarms built into the system where we have some rules that are set that if the model detects a certain type of defect that is of certain size, we are able to stop the line. Okay, cell assembly. So this is the CT scan space. So I don't know how many of you have heard about the Chevy Bolt battery fires and the Ford battery fires and LG paying a few $1 billion to Bolt as part of the lawsuit. So different stories will tell you different things, but the official statement by LG was it was because of the misalignment. So the misalignment problem that I was talking about, where when they inserted the jelly roll into the can, the cathode and anode shifted, and over time, the anode somehow touched the cathode, and that started the fire. So that's, these are sort of the 4 areas where you can think of why that happens. And one of the key parts is the manual inspection process. It's still super manual. The software is a few generations behind. And usually, the state of the art is someone is sitting down and drawing lines on an image that shows where the cathode and anode is. So this is a zoomed-in view of the CT scan. The white is the cathode, and sort of the blurry gray is the anode. And the top shows you a schematic in the cell, what it means to have misalignment of a sheet. So what we did was, again, went to computer vision, autonomous driving. Key points was a very cool creation to get over some of the problems around drawing boxes. So if you detect key points on a vehicle, so took that inspiration, brought it over, and said, okay, if we just annotated key points of these electrodes, we should be able to actually classify all these different types of defects. So whether it's misalignment, whether it's folding, or any other defect, we should be able to take the key points and cut it down to a representation space that helps us actually do this in a much faster and a much easier way. So we built a key point detector, which was, again, hard because you don't have that many annotated images. So you have to figure out how you do that. And that was a fun project. So this is fresh off the press. We did it with a master's thesis student who's about to finish now. And hopefully we publish a paper on this. This work is also scanner and reconstruction agnostic. So if the scanner technology improves, we can hopefully just keep redeploying some of this work and making it better. OK, the second part of the talk, I'm going to save the computational materials for next year. So there's some mystery left and keeps you folks interested in batteries. But we're going to talk about a really important CapEx problem for us. So battery testing needs to be done by cycling the battery. So when a customer comes to us that this is the battery we want you to build, or this is the cell we want you to build, we need to go and design the cell and then need to test it, what the cycle life of it would be. So the state of health, when will the state of health decline below 80%? When will the battery go into second life? We have to find this estimate. We can't build the full format cell, so we start with coin cells. And to understand coin cells, at a very small scale, you can go faster in your DOEs and so on. But still, to cycle a coin cell all the way to its 80% degradation, you need months of time because you're cycling at a given current. And when you're cycling at a given current, it takes time to charge it up, and then you discharge it. Then you charge it, you discharge it at different temperatures because these cells live in different temperatures, whether you're driving the car in Dubai or in Sweden. It depends on how the cell degrades. Temperature is a huge deal. So we said, OK, let's look at the first few cycles of the data and do some time series analysis. So take it as a time series problem and try to predict capacity at a future cycle. And let's show it in parts. Let's show it 10 cycles, 15 cycles, 20 cycles, and see how far can the model predict with what accuracy. And what you see, the different colors are different DOEs, design of experiments, different customers. And we saw a pretty interesting trend that for even a few hundred cycles, we were able to predict what the state of health would be at 400, 500, 600 cycles. And this work was inspired by literature that was published out of Stanford in 2018 or 19. And we looked at it and said, OK, we could actually extend this to just looking at a few different features. So taking inspiration from health tech, so how we monitor your PPG or your heart rate signals. There's a lot of inspiration that comes from there. There's a lot of end-to-end learning, how the Apple Watch gives you a signal on AFib or something bad has happened, or it can predict that in time. So again, taking some applied, interesting research from another time series domain and applying it here. So the outcome of this was we were able to predict state of health with pretty low error. I'm trying to push my team to go to 1%, but we were able to get to 3 for most of our test data. And that brings down the cycling time from months to days. Cyclers cost us millions of dollars to buy and then also to run because it's energy. You're using electricity to run the cyclers. And that immediately hits our CapEx. And being able to do that with machine learning is just a massive CapEx difference in our yearly spend. So this was another very, very nice low-hanging fruit, but still a very hard problem because different cell designs behave differently. So you can have a cell that is high power or high energy density, and very quickly you'll have a huge variation on that predicted graph. So the challenge is to build an algorithm that generalizes across cell designs. Otherwise, we are stuck back in the same problem of building a large data set for every customer. So again, the latency starts to be a problem. So today's takeaways, I think the field I have realized over the last 9 months, I started with what the heck am I going to do in batteries, coming from building autonomous systems, the Apple Watch algorithms, and so on. So I'm now pretty convinced that the space is super ripe with problems for AI practitioners, whether they are interested in molecular dynamics, so reaction paths, or thinking about new materials, properties, or thinking about computer vision or time series. I haven't even touched upon the causality problem. is what you do in coating, when you're coating the electrode on top of a foil, the parameters that you measure in coating, how they actually go impact things in cell assembly. So there's a huge causality problem statement here. Is can I turn a knob at coating that's going to help me be more successful in cell assembly? So building this process simulation model is another extremely interesting problem. And doing this in a data-driven way, because now we have gigafactories. We don't have to rely 100% on physics-based models to do that. The second one, yes, that's what I jumped ahead. So scale, sensing, modeling, and causality are key pillars to breaking new ground. And specifically, I've gone around 9 months, talked to academia. We have a few very interesting academic partnerships that we'll announce soon, funding PhD students here in the UK, in the United States, and already doing it in Sweden on working on some really hard moonshot problems in battery development. And we want to influence this bottom-up stack. So we want to start right at materials and see how much can we push in each area in that bottom-up stack and influence this product development, cell development that has primarily been Excel sheet-driven cell design to more giga-scale data-driven cell design. And lastly, yes, we are hiring. My team is hiring. My partner teams are hiring. If you're interested in the company, if you're interested in moving to Sweden, experiencing Sweden, yes, happy to chat more. We're hiring PhD students, fresh graduates, experienced engineers,